Hey, Joey, I think we are live at this point.
Hey, Joe. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a lot in store for you, and again, thanks for joining us. I know everyone's got things to do and places to be, so we appreciate you spending the next hour with us. One thing that we always mention when we do these is, please, 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 if you have questions about what we're doing, drop them in the chat. We try to answer them in real time as we go. Sometimes we'll wait a couple minutes until it's more at a more appropriate time to answer a question, but we'll definitely get to all of them. It's really one of the main reasons that we do something like this. Joe and I are in different places geographically. Joe's in Colorado. I'm in California, in the Los Angeles area, and each of us are going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to do something here with this rose in front of me, and Joe's going to do something with a martini glass. So two very different things, and particularly two very different approaches as it relates to lighting. He's going to be working with strobe. I'm going to be working with flashlights. So with that, Joe, anything you want to add to that glorious introduction?
I just want to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Joey mentioned, please ask questions. We always find that everyone gets a little bit more out of it when there's questions coming in, and we love questions because we're doing this to see if we can help everyone out a little bit. As Joey mentioned also, tonight's approach for both of us is completely different, except for one key element that was not actually even planned when we started thinking about this. And what that is, we're both really focusing on the small details, or not even details, but choices that we make when building a photograph, building a shot. What you'll also notice as we dive in, neither of our sets are, well, what I would say, overly complicated tonight. I almost had to stop and do a double check when I was done building my set because there's no cards, there's no mirrors, there's one scrim, and that's it for extra modifiers. There are a few grids in there we'll talk about, but both of our sets are very straightforward. And when that happens, all the choices, all the details we make to get our shot where we want it to become more important and, in my opinion, amplified. If you make a big or small move, you will see it very, very quickly with that. So I want to give a shout out to Cameron first because 12:30 a.m. Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
I have to give that shout out
yeah.
because
Cameron's
of
in
that.
the. I want to say that Cameron's in the UK, Scotland maybe. It definitely a commitment to be here. So thank you for that, and thank you to everyone who's joining us. I know we've had people from as far away as India, so we're glad that everybody can join us regardless of the time zone you're in.
And I think with that, I'm going to make some screen adjustments and I'm just going to dive right in on what I'm doing. And tonight, I'm going to be building, my shot's already built. And in fact, let's take a look at the shot first, and then we'll go through the building process and all the steps. So I'm going to switch over. We are in camera at this point. And what we're seeing here is in camera. And let me hit one other little thing. Hopefully I pop up in the right corner. Is we're seeing everything with the modeling lights and the lights in my studio that, well, if they were off, I would be in the dark. So what we're seeing through the camera is modeling lights from strobes. And what's even a little bit more interesting that can kind of get a little confusing is that one of the strobes has a halogen bulb and a 3200 roughly Kelvin. The other one is an LED and more of a daylight. So as we're looking in camera right now, it looks like the martini glass and the olives are in white light. And it actually appears that the background is a little bit on the warm side. Well, based on what I just mentioned, you could probably guess that the background right over here is the one that has the 3200 Kelvin. But let's snap a picture and we'll see what happens. I didn't fire this in a few minutes. There we go. So right off the bat, what we notice is what we thought we were seeing when it's just the modeling lamps and what we actually see when we fire the strobes are completely two different things. What I wanted to create with this image was a mood. What I was not looking to do, and we've done this, Joey's done it, I've done it, is create the perfectly lit martini glass. We'll light glassware, and Joey just posted one, I think last week, where you have a really beautiful edge. This isn't that shot. What I wanted to do was create an ambiance, create a little bit of a mood, some character in there, kind of transport you to a different place. And that was my goal, thus the lighting and the color. So let's go ahead and take a peek at what's going on here. And I'm going to switch camera angles. So I'm going to walk to the back of my set back here. So what I have in the background right now is simply a photograph. Um, I've used this in a couple shots in the past year or so in the background. It's actually something a great uncle of mine captured in New York City, and I think it was 1963. I happen to have the negatives. So I inkjet printed a 16 by 20, and it's kind of a fun background right now. So that's my background. And my set, here's the background. There is a glass about halfway between the main subject and the background, and then my key subject in the foreground. My shot is built in a way that I like to call it, well, it has layers through it. Everything just kind of steps all the way through. And we'll take a look at depth of field and aperture, but we'll spend a moment talking about the background. So we're still on this angle, and I'll come back around. So right now, I have a 10-degree grid on the background. If I take it off, we can really see I am lighting, well, the whole studio on this back side, everything. This glass is being lit. So my choice was just to add a 10-degree grid. And I can just move this around a little bit. So I can really pick and choose where I want that spotlight to be. I also have it at an angle right now because the more straight on, it's more of a spot. If I bring it as more of an angle, I can aim it across. And it was just kind of a happy medium. And all of these are on sliders, so I can slide the lights pretty easily. So I kind of went a little bit where the little darker areas, I found it up and went right into here. It blew out the scene. So I just kind of came over to the side a little bit on there. But I wanted that color temperature blue, that kind of that cool blue in the background. Now, I could almost guess that a couple people might ask, well, why go with that color temperature blue and not just change the Kelvin in camera? And that's definitely something I could have done the Kelvin in camera, except for one problem. This light up here, which is lighting the martini glass, if I had done the Kelvin in camera, and actually, why not? We'll just do one real quickly. I'll just drop it. You can see, we can just see it just by, let me just do that, take a picture. All of a sudden, the whole thing doesn't look right. The olives, well, if I'm served olives in a martini glass like this, I'm probably not going to eat them. And I want them to look nice and healthy. Hey, I care about my olives. What can I tell you? So I'm going back to a daylight balance. So the background has the blue, but I'm using white light on my hero, on my subject. So for
Hey,
me, that
Joe.
was, yes, Joey.
When you decide to use another color like that, is it are you trying to create depth in the image? Meaning, by having another color in that background layer, is it a way for you to create depth, or is it just to like set off the foreground martini glass? And then the other question I have is when you get to post processing, like you're at 5500 white balance, will you tweak from there to like dial it into just exactly the color that you want?
Whew, I think I got three questions in there, I have a feeling. I'm going to work backwards. So the first one is yes. This will come in, whether it's Lightroom or Capture One, and I'll tweak the Kelvin. But keep in mind, that's going to be a global tweak. When I do that, that's going to change the foreground and the background. If I cool it down, it's the glass and the background. If I warm it up, it's the glass and the background. So I have to remember they're going to move pretty much equally the same way. So I will tweak it, but I have to remember that if I tweak thinking about the blue, it will change my main subject. And I want to be very careful about this guy staying nice and neutral for this shot. One of the other questions you had asked about, am I just trying to separate with the color? And I'll just take another quick shot. The foreground and background from being now these nice green olives and white light to the background. Yes, there is part of it that it's about using the difference in color to have, I don't want to say warm versus cool, but the separation does help. One of the most difficult things I find about still photography is we live in a three-dimensional world, but photography is a two-dimensional medium. So anything we can do to create depth, and without a doubt changing the color between the foreground and background does that quite a bit, I'm going to try to do. Then the other part was I'm using the blue back here because I really want to create a little bit different ambiance back there. I could have just as easily gone with a warm gel actually back there. That would have been a completely different time of day, mood, environment. And I got to be honest with you guys. Joey and I both have something very similar. Sitting right next to me is a bin of gels. I really don't want to tell you how many of these I tested before I settled on what was a full CTB, color temperature blue gel. I tested 10 probably, from warm to cool at all different levels. And I just liked the character of this one. And that's what came through. So that was a pretty big decision, and one that it took a while. And it was a big decision, but a full CDB to a half to a quarter to doubling up even, it made a lot of changes. And those are those changes that can really alter the photograph in there. So great questions, I'm going to say, because I like those questions. Now, continuing on with this, and I have to go back and forth just a little bit because it wouldn't be me otherwise. Here, we can see that glass in the background fairly well, that second glass. But when I take a picture, it almost vanishes. It's there. It's more there when you call it out because the positioning of it is very much placed on purpose in this kind of a realm. It's fitting back into this spot. And I could move it around and tweak it so it fits a little bit more, but I kind of want to leave it there. And I can also move it in or out depending how much of it I see or how much of it is in focus. So that kind of a detail for me was important to mimic the shape of the glass in the foreground, but also mimic the buildings coming together in the scene. Because I wanted kind of, maybe there's a second person, maybe there's a story that's going on here, and maybe it just blends into the background. I love it when my audience can look at an image and pull their own story from it, because then I know they're in the image, they're part of the image, and that's a lot of fun. So we can start moving forward, and this is actually probably a good time to talk about glassware. It's a good subject. So I have another glass sitting here. I'll just set it down right next to it. They probably look very similar in size, shape they are. There's a different level of what I would call frost on the glass. And I could have put liquid in here, but I was going for more of the illusion of liquid. So there's actually a matte spray that's going from here to here. I tested with liquid. Liquid, as you guys have probably heard Joe and I talk about before, becomes a lens. And that sometimes is great, but I didn't want to go that route. So what I ended up doing, and I'll flip this back over, I very carefully, with like blue painter's tape, taped off the very top, taped off the bottom, and then I used a compass, our old style compass we all used in college, to draw a line all the way across. And then I just use an X-Acto knife to cut off this bottom portion so that it has that nice little lip on it that kind of gives the illusion of liquid. I could also spritz it. I tested that. As you can imagine, I sprayed a lot of glasses. In this case, I used, well, actually just matte spray. There are times when I'm working with glassware, there's three different sprays I use. The heaviest one is matte spray. The lightest one is something called crystal clear acrylic. It's a Krylon. You could put it on and it's almost don't notice it. But what's great about it, it adds a little bit of texture. So if you're ever going to do a spritz, like water droplets, whether it's water or glycerin in water, it gives a little tooth so the liquid doesn't go just sliding down the glassware. And then there's one that people use on like holiday decoration windows that's like a frosted. That for me works well for backgrounds, but not subjects because there's a little flakiness. So this one is actually crystal clear acrylic and this one's matte spray. And I had to test them. So that was part of the choice. And of course, I never want to see food go to waste. So the quality of the olives were a consideration. Just going to toss that in there. So I'm just looking at questions. All right. Again, moving back to front, we can get to the subject. So just to reiterate the backlight, it's a strobe, 10-degree grid, blue gel. Pretty straightforward. But now we have our key light, our main light source. It's another strobe, and I could have done this with hot lights. I don't think I could have pulled it off with flashlights like Joey's doing tonight, but I say hot lights, that dates me. LED lights would have been just fine. Continuous lighting, I'll say that. So this one is battery powered, it's charging, thus there is a cord. It has a 5-degree grid. What's a little bit unique and very hard to see because the room lights are on right now. There's a hot spot only right here. Actually, you can see it on my hand. Let me grab something because I noticed that's a little difficult to see in the lit room, which is always the fun thing about doing live demonstrations is we need that. So there you go. You can really see that 5-degree grid is very much limiting. Let's see if I go in here too. That'll help. Or this one here. It's limiting where that light's hitting. And there's a reason for that. What I wanted to do was to have this strobe just light pretty much where the olives are and the front lip. And you would say, well, why a 10-inch diffuser coming through here? The light's just passing through. And the main reason is for me, I still have to deal with this back lip. So without it, this back lip loses the shape of it. And I wanted to keep the shape, so it had to reflect some white. Well, to lack of a better expression, to kill two birds with one stone, I added the larger 10-inch dot, and you could use, heck, a coat hanger and diffusion material very easily. And this dot, it's set up on an arm. It's kind of hard to see right here. There's an arm right there, but this might help. I can actually just move it. I can move it in and out. And, I can move it up and down. It'll also slide. If we go back in camera, and we'll see how well we can see this in camera. Oh, there we go. I'm just moving the dot a little bit. You can probably see that in the upper right corner, but it does change the lighting on the shot quite a bit. If this room was dark, you would definitely see it quite a bit more. But right now, so this allows me just to fine tune where that light's hitting right in this area. Because there's the back of the glass getting a little highlight. There's a little bit on the olives. You can really see the change on the top of the olives. Actually, let's take a couple shots here. We'll take one in this position. And where did it go? There it is. And then I'll move it over just a little bit. Take another shot. Let's see if I can go back between the two. So that is a very small move with that 10-inch dot that I call in there, or scrim. And the beauty is, all I have to do is move it slightly to get to that, which is a lot of fun. Taking a look at the set, let's see which camera gives a better view. I think this one will. As some of you guys know, Joey and I are, I'll just say, detail oriented. We care about details. And on my set, you'll notice there's little pieces of black tape right here. What that means is sometimes I need to rotate this, but I can always move it in and out, and the glass will always slide back exactly where I want it. So if I change glassware, if I need to rotate it because I want the olives in a different position, I can rotate, make sure it's right where it needs to be for that. And in fact, I don't think you can see it there, but let's see if we can see here. Oh, you can. If we follow this line of the olives pick, there's another piece of black tape right here. And what that is, it gives me a pretty good indication of where the olive pick has to be. I could not have it right down here because I found it reflecting back in my shot. So that didn't work very well for me. Those little subtle things are important. You can't see on this column here where I move this dot, but on the very bottom, the rotation point, I have another piece of tape. And what this piece of tape is doing, it pretty much it's my tell. As I'm doing this for you guys and I'm moving it in and out, or I'm testing it, or I get to a point in a shot and I think, oh, I think that's what I want. I capture it. Then I go, oh, maybe I want to change it again. And I move it. We've all done this. You get something really close, you like it, you make what you think is a tiny move and you move too far. Well, by having that piece of tape there, I'm back to where I was. And just,
Hey, Joe.
unless I knock it over. Yes, Joey.
Dan has a question. It's a great question. He says, the addition of the second glass is great. It's very subtle, but it creates a story. How did you avoid having light from the gel D2, meaning the D2 strobe head, being
Yeah.
reflected in the back glass? Do you have something that's shielding that light to keep that reflection away, or is it just the angle isn't a problem?
It's the angle's not a problem. I'm going to come back into the back light and I'll turn back up the modeling light so you can see it a little bit more back here. The light is passing behind it. If I move this glass back, all of a sudden, the glass is now being lit where it is here. And in fact, we can see a shadow from it on the background. As it comes forward, the light is going behind the background light, the D2, is going behind the glass. And that's why it has the grid on it. It just, one of the reasons it bypasses this light. There's also no light hitting this glass from the front light, from the key light. So what's happened is I've avoided any light hitting that glass except the light that's actually passing through from the background. So when this fires, the only light on the background is what's actually passing through it. Now, there is a little bit of a light edge to it, and part of that's coming from my wall to the side. And originally, I had started out with a dart card. Let's go back to see if you can see it. That background glass has a little bit of a light edge on the left side. Well, I have some white light colored walls in here, and I start out with a black card to lose it, but then when it's up against the Empire State Building in the background, I lost the texture and the shape, so I allowed it to come back in. Interestingly, if I was to pop on, let me hit this one, my room lights, I did discover, let's see if it ends up in this shot because I changed it slightly. If you look at that back glass right now, you can see that little tiny dot in the stemware of the back glass, and it's gone there. That's not caused by any strobe. That's simply caused by my room lights. So that's where I still have to keep an eye on what's going on. Even though I'm using strobes, and my whole exposure is based on strobes right now, that is picking up a reflection just like it's a mirror in my shot. So those type of considerations still come into play.
One of the things
But it was
Joe and I
about
have talked
control.
Joe and I have talked about a few times is that it's always great when you're shooting with strobe. It's always great practice to do a picture without the strobe firing, just so that you can see what existing light is contributing to your shot. And something like that, that little dot, you look at it later and say, what the heck is that? Joe, I just wanted to jam in another question. Talking about the distance between the D2 head with the grid above the glass and the dot, and the distance, it's probably more about the distance of the dot to the glass than it is the dot to the strobe head. You're figuring, you're placing that based on the highlight that you want to get off the rim of the glass.
Yeah, I definitely am. Well, actually, a couple of factors came in. I really cared about the size of the source, and if I can make the light appear a little bigger or smaller, and we've talked a lot about hard versus soft, size of the source. The dot becomes the size of the source in this case, but I'm looking at that reflection right on this lip, and that's where, again, I think it was this, we can see this right on the edge. It really is on the edge. It is only hitting right here. Most of the light is actually, if you see my hand, it gives you an idea of just the angle of it. It's hitting this edge and landing over here just to capture this edge and the olives. It's actually avoiding the back of the glass for the most part, except the white reflection that's back there, just bouncing off. The other characteristic that I had to think about, when I was originally setting up this shot, I had done it as a vertical. And I'll tell you, when I did it as a vertical, this scrim is probably 2 millimeters outside the frame of the shot. I have it as low as I could possibly get it without it being in the frame, and I didn't want to do any cropping. So that was another factor where everything had to go in this shot. And those are those small little things that do matter. Because Joey mentioned this, I'm going to go back in camera and let me take a look at the last shot. What you're looking at is the lighting without the strobes firing. It's the modeling lights. So, and this is kind of a neat image because it really does show where the light is hitting, because you're only seeing the modeling light from the top light right now, and maybe a little bit of light that's coming in because how I'm lit. So this is an image without the strobes, and that's an image with the strobes. So it really does tell you how much exposure is coming in from the strobes. Excuse my voice. It's firing another one. So the last thing I want to talk about is depth of field. And this one is really important for me on this shot because I think you'll see this shot change very quickly. I am at f8. So I'm at, well, you guys can see it, 1/200, ISO 250, f8. Let's jump for a second. Let's go 11, 16, 22, so 3 stops. Helps if I go the correct way. And I'm just going to do it with ISO just to make this quick. I could adjust the strobes, but 250, 500, 1,000. Hopefully I did the math right. I might have not done the math right. Now that I say that, looks a little darker. So I'm going to stick to 22. Make it a little brighter here. Look at F22, look at the background. All of a sudden, the background is now competing with the subject. And I'm not going to say that's good or bad. I'm just going to say it's not what I was after for the image. I wanted that separation. And we all know let's make another jump. F32. Well, at this point, the olive's completely in focus. I am focused from here. And actually, my focus point, just so everyone knows, was right here on the olive. I have the background in focus pretty much almost all the way. Not quite, but pretty close. But if we go the other direction, I'm going to go all the way back down. I started F8 at 250. I'll just click it so we can see the comparison. So look at the difference between F8 and 32. And again, I'm not going to say one's better than the other overall. I'm going to say this is more what I was looking for, and it's what my goal was. And at F8, I am only holding focus right here. The back edge of the glass, and this is kind of interesting. The back edge of the glass, you can see it in the shot when it fires. It's just below the lip. Actually, my finger does a pretty good job showing where it is. So yeah, I just rotated it without thinking. So it's right here. And I'm just trying to line it up. I didn't want it perfect. The only way for me to get it perfect, especially when I was doing the vertical shot, would have been a tilt shift lens. But I wasn't using a tilt shift because, well, I don't have a 100 millimeter tilt shift lens or the 85. So this one worked really well. But let's go a little bit, let's go f5.6. 5.6. I can easily do the ISO. Sometimes easier said than done for me. So that's 5.6. That's F8. At 5.6, it's just a little bit too soft in the background. Not a lot, just a little bit. Whoops, as I rotate it. See, there's one of the vertical test shots, just so you guys know. I like a little bit more detail. That's not enough. That's a little bit more. Not quite, that's not enough detail. So F8. And one last test. Let's take a look at F11. Then I'll pass it over to Joey. F11 is pretty good, but I still kind of settle on F8. It's still where I wanted to be with the shot. And so all of those decisions from back to front, from the background, the subject, to the lighting on the background, to the placement of the second glass, to the frost on the first glass, heck, just the rotation of the olives to how it's lit. There's nothing elaborate about this set. When we look at this set, 2 lights with grids and 1 piece of diffusion. That's it. There's nothing else here. And when that happens, it's really nice when that happens. I got room to move my hands. But all those little details we have to think about a little bit more every time. So it's those small choices. One typical photographer, one more thing. The last thing I'm going to point out is, I mentioned it earlier, is the rigging part. And Joey and I always talk about this because it reduces what we call mental friction for us. Everything is on sliders. These are just carpet sliders, and I have carpet on my set. This can pivot. I can raise it up and down. I can angle it any direction I want. Everything is very easily moved on my set. So I can fine tune all those little details to get what I want. So with that, I hope you guys found that educational, enjoyed it. Joey, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Awesome. Great shot too, Joe. Just
Thank
before
you.
we make the switch, Dan was asking about the difference in power between the 2 strobes, and the order in which you set intensity, whether you start in the back or you start on the subject.
There is, and another great question. I have to think for a second and glance at it. The D2 on the background, so the guy sitting back there, that's one of my workhorses of a light. That light, most of you guys know I used to work for ProPhoto, but I've been using ProPhoto for 25, 30 years. It's one of my workhorses. It's 1,000 watt, but I use it quite a bit because it's an unbelievable fast recycling time, but also it has the ability to, has a freeze mode, and I can do 1/50,000th of a second flash duration. I don't need either of those right now, but that's a 1,000 watt light. The one sitting on top, it's a 250 watt light. It's nice when I have this one up top here, and the reason is it weighs nothing. It's incredibly light. I can put the D2 on the boom and weight it, but I'll be honest, I don't have to. I'm not going to, because this one's just much easier to rig. There's a counterweight. You guys, see if I can spin it. Yep, there it is. See, I can easily spin it, and here's the counterweight. And in fact, if it's set up properly, it's barely, you can see I have that centerpiece really loose. And so it's balanced. And it's much easier to balance this light than it is something that's much heavier. The, the way I put this together, I had set the glass in, the background roughed in. I didn't know exactly where we were going to go, but I knew the background was going to be such a key element to this shot. I did the background lighting first, and I actually did it probably around f16. The shot was pretty much in focus, or f22, but I lit the background for the most part. I didn't know where the glass was going to go. I also didn't know the frost on the glass. And once I determined the frost level on the glass, then I could determine the exact placement of this strobe, the power, the dot, and then there's the dance of balancing everything. Little things. I promise, Joey, I'll give you enough time. Let me do this in camera. Little tiny details on this background are important. If you look at the left side, it seems like you're at the edge of it. You're not. It's actually just the edge of the Empire State Building. There's the edge of the print. And where this was going to line up, is it here, here, here? All those little details mattered to me about where that came in and how this glass could fit. Like I could put that glass right in there to mimic the shape. All those little things came into consideration on this shot. And that's kind of the last and also the most enjoyable step for me. You get everything in here, you're pretty darn close, and then you start tweaking things. And I don't think you'll see it. This is the OCD part of me. This is a little piece of tape right here. It's telling me this corner of the print. Behind this, there's two more pieces of tape marking the back side of the center column. I can move almost everything on this set, take it away and get it back in place pretty darn close, because while fine tuning, I sometimes go the wrong direction. And it's nice not to get too frustrated and have to come back. So with that, Joey, it's to you.
Thank you, Joe. So I thought I would show you something a little different. For those of you who have been with us before, oftentimes these sets are there's a lot of stuff going on. And, Joe mentioned like all this real estate. It's weird to have all this real estate. But one of the reasons that I actually do have so much room is because this is my light source. It's just, it's a pen light. It's a flashlight. Now, this is a little bit different quality flashlight than you might be able to pick up at, your local hardware store or something. What makes this different, and I'll show you, I've got a black card so that you can see it, is it's got a lens in it, which creates a really nice beam. And so it's a very tightly focused beam of light. And so I have 4 of these, and I'm kind of cheating because this light was behind the background, but so I could show this to you, I swapped it out with another light. But it is essentially, I did a picture with it a picture yesterday using nothing but these pen lights. And the great thing about them is they're controllable. You can change the intensity of them, meaning they're not like on or off. You can change how much power comes out of them. And the most important thing is they're color correct, meaning photographically they're the proper what's called color rendition. It's a high CRI, color rendition index, which simply means that the color you get out of it, the camera can see all of it. It's full spectrum. So without going into a whole lot of detail about the flashlights, there's so much about this that's amazingly cool. One is that to mount them, all you need is something like a very simple clamp, and then now you've got it mounted. You just need a way to, move this around. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. If for those of you that are familiar with these kinds of arms, this is a Manfrotto variable friction arm, it's called. And so with something like this, you can mount this, position the light where you want it, tighten it down, and it'll stay there. I find that to be a little bit complicated, meaning that I can't move it in very small increments. So I use something like this. This is a much smaller clamp, and it'll hold the light just as well. But then if I hang it, I can tilt it and move it different ways that are much more subtle. And since my subject today is this flower, I need subtle movement. So let me take you on a little bit of a tour of what I've got going here. So if we go in camera, now it's out of focus on purpose. I just happened to notice how this looked and I thought it was kind of cool. But the only light that's on is the background light. So if I sharpen it up close enough, you can see I'm getting this kind of cool out of focus thing going on in the background. If I change f-stops, it's going to change a little bit. I found that F11 was the place where I was getting the circles of confusion, and that's what that's called in the background that I like. Now I'm starting there, and the reason is I saw, a question, and this is a really good, it's a good question. It's also a good way of thinking about photography, at least it is to me, is where do you start? Do you start with the subject or do you start in the background? For me, I often start in the background and build forward from there. And so I'm going to do that today. And so what I've got going, if I go to, let's see, I think this camera will show it best. You can see I've got, in fact, I'll walk back there so you can see. Let's see if you can see me here. Yeah. Yeah. So what it is it's a piece of plastic that's got kind of this frosted surface to it. As I pull my hand away from it, you can see up close, it's very sharp, and further away, it's not so sharp. And I actually thought about putting flowers behind this to see how that would render. Turned out it didn't work out very well. And I bring that up because so often these these kinds of shoots they're experiments as you're going along. So you're like, you try this, it doesn't work. You try something else, that doesn't work. The best ideas that you seem to have don't end up working out. But Joe and I talk about this all the time. It's very much like a funnel in that you're working out all the ideas that are bad and getting to something tighter and tighter, like a funnel, where you finally find an idea that actually works. So I can't tell you, working with this rose, how many different false starts I had that didn't work until I got to something that I like. So anyway, getting back to the setup, you can see in, I think probably, let's look at that view. So this is a flashlight right there. If I can do it with this arm. And this is a flashlight. The other one above it, you can just barely see it. There's two flashlights, and then there's a third one right there. So those are the three lights that are lighting that are going to light the rose. And then this was the fourth one, but I pulled it out so you could see it and substituted another light back there. But the quality of light is identical. It's no different. So let's start in the back. As I said, I like the circles of confusion there as a background. I just think it's kind of like a nice light. But let me start off. I'm going to turn all the lights off so we get to that. So the first light I'm going to turn on is the very top one. And it gives us that. And if I come back to this view, you can see, I mean, it's kind of blowing out a little bit. In fact, I can probably knock that down so that you can see it a little better. Oh, yeah, yeah. There we go. Do you see me, Joe? Good. Okay. Sorry, I should have done that earlier. So the point is like, if you look back in camera, this to me is what I could stop here and call this good and say, meh, that looks pretty decent. what this is that first light, what I want out of it is just sort of general illumination. And so if I pivot it a little bit so that you can see, there's nothing. And as it comes back in, it's just kind of like an overall light. Now, I don't think that that's enough. So what I want is I want more of a light kind of in the center of the flower, which is that. Now let me knock down the exposure. So between the two of them, what I'm trying to do is sort of illuminate the whole flower with the first light, which is more of a broad light, and then a very tight beam right in the center of the flower to kind of draw your eye into that, if that makes sense. And so if I go back here, if I took the other light, the first light off, just so you can see the difference, see it's quite a reach. That's what that one light, that first light, the main light is doing. And this is the one in the center. So essentially that first light is just sort of giving us illumination all the way to the outside petals, where that main light there is giving us illumination. Knock it down a little more. And I'll bring up the background a bit. So I look at this and I think, well, I'm pretty happy with that. I got because when I'm photographing a flower, I always love that sort of glowy quality to the outer petals to feel as though it's almost illuminated from the inside out. It's a stylistic thing. It's just something I like to see. So I'm seeing that. I can tell that there's like a shadow being cast on one of the petals. So I'm getting that, and you can see the sort of those inner petals. I'm seeing the shape. So all of that is satisfactory to me. I also like the silhouette of the leaves just below the rose. I like that, that kind of a feeling. In fact,
Hey,
now that
Joey,
yeah,
we have a couple of great questions in here. The most recent one is from Ben. And Ben, thank you for seeing me eat my props. I appreciate that. That's why I'm a food photographer. But Ben had asked, what's the rating on those flashlights? Do you know the lumens? And I don't know if you probably do know the lumens. I think what might surprise people is when you tell them your exposure information with those flashlights.
yeah. So here's the exposure, which when you think about it is kind of it's kind of amazing. You're at ISO 100, you're at 200th of a second at f11. The I don't know the exact lumen rating, but they're powerful, and particularly with the lenses on the end of them, they're more concentrated and focused, so you get quite a bit of light out of them. There are a lot of different flashlights on the market. These are made by a company called Prometheus Lights. They are they're just really great lights. I mean, the guy who runs that company, he's completely a nerd about nothing but that flashlights. That's all they make. But they're really good, and I'll warn you, they're very expensive. But like anything else, you get what you pay for. But having said that, you don't have to have this kind of a light to do this. And let me show you what I mean. There's a couple of ways to modify a flashlight. And so let me bring the lights back up. So here's my flashlight. This is shrink tubing that you can get at Home Depot, and it clips to this flashlight just like so, which kind of keeps the beam concentrated for me. It also keeps it so that I won't see the source. So you see here, you can see the source. When I put this on, it's almost like a snoot, if that makes sense. There we go. Now another way you can do this is with this. This is called cinefoil, and you can do the exact same thing. You can slide this under the clip like so, wrap it around the flashlight, and you can see like on the back side, you can see it, but as I close it up, I can make this into a very, very tight little, see it down here? And I can squeeze this together and make the light really whatever shape I want it. Like there's kind of a circle, but if I was very careful and I were to like wrap this very, very perfectly, I could get a very, there you go, very tight beam. So you don't have to have the best flashlight you've ever had, but I mean, it helps. But there are other ways, including cinefoil, as a way to modify the shape of the beam. So
Joey, one of the questions that Ben was still asking about is, trying to get a nice, small, tight circle. And I'm trying to remember what one of our other students, Eileen, had recommended from her career to make a tight
oh,
circle from a flashlight.
yeah, she used, when a doctor looks in your ear or up your nose and they use that little cone looking thing. She's a doctor. And what she did is she took that and some cinefoil and created something like that. So she got a perfect circle out of the end. There's a lot of ways. I mean, this is a much smaller piece of shrink tubing. So you can put one piece inside of another and you can get a perfect circle if you really want to. There's a lot of ways to do it. I mean, here's a couple other flashlights. I've got these on Amazon. They're pen lights. I've used them for light painting and things like that. This is by far the best flashlight I've ever used. But there are other ways to do it, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. The real issue, and it was part of the question, is how much power do you need? And to that point, I mean, if you're getting, as I said, that kind of an exposure, it's not half bad. I mean, you can work with these all the time, and that's sort of the point. Is I often feel like to invest in lighting can be very expensive, and if you can spend a little money on some flashlights, you can do some serious damage. So let me move on and finish off this shot, and then we'll take whatever questions we have time left for. But the one thing that I wanted to note here, I'm going to tip the camera down just a little bit so you can see. Down at the bottom, the stem to me needs a little something. And so what I'm going to do is add this, if I can get to it. I'll come at it from this side. Add this last light. And so if I just, it's just a hint. And if I go back to a different view, I think you'll be able to see where that light is. There. So it's right here. It's pretty close. But all I'm doing is I'm just lighting up the edge of the stem so that you get a little value out of it, if that makes sense. And that's the idea. So, just to reiterate, the shot is built from the back, and I'll take one so we can see what it looks like that. It's just enough to, and I often refer to it this way, is show it to you without really, showing it to you too strongly. Meaning the light on the stem, I want you to see that there's a stem there and that there's some shape to it and all of that. And the flashlight allows me to do it. I mean, if we go back to this, oh, we're looking at it's not much to put it there. So it's just a hint of light is the point. So the other thing I wanted to mention is the way that I rig flowers, which people have asked me about, and I've never really talked about it before. But you can see here, I've got a million of these things, vases of different shapes. Here's another one. But one thing I always do is I put rocks in the bottom of them like that. And the reason is I can stick the stem into the rocks and it'll stay. If you don't do that, the stem wants to go all over the place. So I can put it along an edge and then take something like this, which is a little mini hair clip, and clip it to the edge of the glass. And what that keeps it, it's now anchored at 2 different points. So I can actually slide this around and it won't fall. And then I can, from that point, twist it around and find the best side of the flower. In fact, this is a really beautiful flower. I think this one is actually prettier than the one I have in place. Never satisfied. Let's see if I'm right. You guys tell me what you think. Look at that. That's like a silhouette. It's just got a lot of layers to it. It's really pretty. So with that, Joe, I think I've covered. Oh, there was one other thing I wanted. How much time we got? A few minutes.
We got time. We got a few minutes.
Sometimes, let me come back to this. Sometimes, I don't know if any of you have ever done light painting. Light painting is really fun. What it is you take something like, let me move this out of the way before I knock it over. Light painting works something like this. You would come in with a flashlight and you would move the light around like that. And instead of having lights fixed in place, you'd be moving it around while the shutter is open. So these kinds of flashlights are great for that. One of the techniques that some people use when they do light painting is they use diffusion. And what I mean by that is, let me go back in camera. I'm going to turn all the lights off except the background. In fact, I'll even turn that one off too. So let's say that you were going to do a picture and you wanted to light paint it. One of the ways that you would do it is you would come in like this and you would make exposures or an exposure, and maybe you'd come back and you get the top, and then you'd come back from this side and you'd light up like that, and you'd keep the flashlight out of it. But what some people do is they bring diffusion into the equation. And what I've done here is I've mounted some diffusion. All I have to do is figure out how I make it fit. Oh, I had it mounted the other way. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. I had the camera set up differently right before we started, and I changed it right at the last minute. So now nothing lines up.
We're notorious for that, making last minute changes like, oh, this will be better. Let's switch it. Then there's always one little component.
So you can see the difference in the diffusion. In fact, I'll open up a little so you can see it a little better. And I'll turn on the backlight as well. So what some people will do is they'll make an exposure, let's say, using the overall light and maybe the background light or maybe the side light, and then they'll turn those lights off. This is all in the dark. Then you slide the diffusion in, and then you come in and you add, where you want diffusion, or you do it the other way. You do the diffusion first, and then you get a sharp image. So what you're essentially doing is a double exposure on one image. So you open the shutter for, say, 30 seconds. You paint part of it with the light without the filtration, without the diffusion, move the diffusion in, paint some more, and you end up with part of the shot sharp, part of the shot soft. But you need something like this to be able to move it around quickly, so that because you can't be screwing filters on and off and all that. So you need a way to rig it so that you can put something in place and then move it away and then put it back in place and make it all work. It's a great technique. It's a lot of fun, but it's something that you would normally do with flashlights. So, my hope is that after talking about this for a while, maybe you'll try some flashlights and do a little lighting.
Wow, we've covered a lot. There was a handful of questions that popped in regarding rigging, and I know we're right on the end of our hour. Rigging is something with the equipment that Joey and I talk about pretty much every session, every workshop, because some of the stuff is purchased, and a lot of the stuff is purchased from other industries, maybe the scientific industry, such as what our breadboards that we're using. We're both using quite a few of them. And then the rigging is always done in ways to reduce mental friction. And we'll talk about that. I know we didn't get to the questions, and I apologize. We'll be diving into that in all sessions, all workshop, because it's something that really can elevate your work. And you don't have to go the expensive route. What you do find is, as you try to reduce a little bit more mental friction, you might buy something that's a little bit more of a creature comfort that helps you out a little bit more with that. But again, we will talk about it. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and thank you everyone for being here, that starting next week, we do launch a 6-session over the course of 3 weeks master lighting workshop class. It's 2 nights a week for 3 weeks. We'll be diving into everything from, well, light painting, strobes, continuous lighting, indirect lighting, splashes, water droplets. We're going to dive into a whole bunch of different things, liquid in motion. So if anyone's interested and have any questions, please reach out with your questions. But that launches next week. And we just want to say thank you guys for being here. Joey, any final things you want to add?
No, I just want to echo what Joe said. Thank you for being here. I know everybody, like I say, is, you got things to do and places to be. So thanks for spending an hour with us. And, we hope we see you very soon.
Thanks, everyone. And Joey will send out a link tomorrow with the video. So if there's something you missed and you want to rewatch it, you'll get a copy of the video. It's also going to be on our site. We have a video page on our site at this point for all the sessions. If you missed a session, one of these, they're actually now on the site. Please check them out and let us know what you think. And if there's anything that you would like us to cover in an hour-long session, we're happy to take a look at it and let you guys know. So thank you guys. Have a wonderful evening.